then forgiveness. And if you ever want to be free, if you want to be set free, forgive others. We'll get into that. But it's not only forgiveness, it's actually seeking after a restored relationship. See, this is a huge issue today. On the global scale, this is a huge issue because not doing it leads to suicide bombings and campaigns of terror and scapegoating and demonizing and war. But even on the smaller scale, not seeking reconciliation leads to broken marriages, shattered families, feuds between neighbors, and divided churches. You see, it's critical that we seek after reconciliation. It doesn't simply happen naturally or by default drive. It is hard work. So let's look at this today as we consider why it's critical, what it is, and how you do it. Okay, first, why it's critical. I've already gotten into some of this, but let's drill down a little deeper. First, reconciliation and pursuing restored relationships is critical because it is the key to a healthy, connected community. The opposite of that, the other way to say that is gossiping, slandering, backbiting, pushing one another down. Those can be the termites in the structure of an otherwise beautiful church. You can have a church that looks beautiful and flourishing with a lot of wonderful people like yourselves, but if you are not pursuing reconciliation when relationships have been broken, the slightest wind can blow the whole thing over. Patrick Lencioni talks about this in his groundbreaking book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which talks about leadership in a business context. But when he talks about the 5 dysfunctions, he starts with step 1, which is trust in the community. In his case, trust in the workplace. If you don't have trust, you can't move on to the next step. You can't build anything on a foundation that doesn't have trust. You need to relentlessly pursue trust, respect, communication, reconciliation. This is why in a few weeks here, we're going to have a couple and their child come. They're going to become members of this church. And one of the vows you make when you become a member of the community commits to you and you commit to the community. And it's a very countercultural thing because you're saying, I'm going to be a part of this church, not just for as long as I feel like it or until someone says something I don't like. I'm committed to this church through all the ups and the downs. And then the church community says, and we commit to you also. Not just for as long as you get it right or until you say something we don't like, but we're committed to you through thick and thin as well. And one of the vows you make when you become a member of the church is, I commit to pursue the unity, purity, and peace of this community. See, we have to commit to things like that because the default drive is, I commit to pursue my own well-being. If I don't like the way that you said that or the way you look at me or what you're doing, I'm going to go and, maybe the opposite way we would do verse 15. Instead of, if another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when just the two of you are alone. Maybe today's Constitution would say, if another member of the church does something you don't like, go and point out the fault to everybody else. Talk about them behind their back. Post things on social media showing people how bad they are. Get as many people together on your side as you can, and then go ahead and scapegoat and ostracize and throw stones at them. And Jesus says, red alert. When you do that, you will be eroding the foundation of the community. But not only that, you'll be eroding the foundation of your own soul. Because this is not only a pathway toward a healthy community, this is critical for your own emotional health. Frederick Buechner, Christian writer, theologian, wrote, of the 7 deadly sins, anger is the most fun. To lick your wounds, to smack your lips over grievances long past, to roll over your tongue the prospect of bitter confrontations still to come, to savor the last toothsome morsel of the pain they're giving back to them, in many ways is a feast fit for a king or a queen. The chief drawback is that what you are wolfing down at this feast is yourself. The skeleton at the feast is you. See? This is another way of him saying, if you ever want to be a slave to somebody, hold a grudge against them. Because they're walking around all the time not thinking about you. And they're living rent-free in your mind all the time. As others have written, holding a grudge against someone is like drinking rat poison and expecting the rat to die. And Frederick Buechner comes and says, doesn't it feel so good to hold a grudge? You feel like you have the higher ground. You feel like you are right and they are wrong. And it's a feast. The only problem is, it's eating you from within. It's critical for community. It's critical for your own emotional health. Reconciliation is important for your own spiritual vitality, as forgiveness gives you an opportunity to experience the gospel. It actually demonstrates that you have received the grace of what God has done for you. What do I mean by that? I mean, to forgive another person actually puts you in the laboratory. It's like when I went with a bunch of doctors to South Sudan, and we were working in this hospital that our church, previous church, had helped to start in South Sudan. And I'd watch these surgeons do a surgery on a patient in South Sudan, and they were learning at such a rapid rate. I realized one of their slogans was, in terms of surgery, see one, do one, teach one, right? And so forgiveness gives you the opportunity to see Jesus' forgiveness in your life, to see it, but then to actually go practice it in your life as well. You begin to develop a mantra. How do I seek forgiveness toward this other person or these other people? How do I become a person who does not harbor resentment and malice, but rather has a desire to be someone who lives at peace as far as it is possible with others? A Christian is someone who can say, as God has forgiven me, I desire to forgive these people. Maybe you can't even forgive that person yet today. Maybe your start is, I just desire to forgive that person. I'm open to being open about it. And as you do, you will notice that the depth of the gospel will grow in your own heart. And as you do, that begins to become a sign to the watching world for the forgiveness of God toward you. When there was the mass shooting in the African American church in the South, one of the things that grabbed the attention of the world was not only the terrible atrocity of racism when this one person would go into this church community, pray with them, and then take the lives of so many innocent people with malice and evil. But what really grabbed the watching world was the way in which that church forgave that person. And when you begin to live a life of deep forgiveness, from a deep well of a God who knows you and loves you and forgives you, that is show and tell, my friends. That is show and tell to the watching world, because the watching world says if they took out a tooth, you take out their whole mouth, right? If they take you out, you take out their whole tribe. And Jesus says that's a great way towards extermination of the whole world. But I have a different way. A way of taking all the pain and brokenness of myself upon the cross. Recycling vengeance into forgiveness. What does Jesus say on the cross as he's being unjustly crucified? He does not say, God, I call down fireballs from heaven to take out all these people. He doesn't say, one day you will all get what's coming to you. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Forgive these people, for they know not what they do. He recycles vengeance into forgiveness. So it's critical. It's a totally different way of living, but it actually sets you free and sets me free. Now, here's what it is. And let's start by talking about what it isn't. See, forgiveness doesn't mean saying that the offense didn't really happen or that it didn't really matter. See, in those cases where it didn't really happen or it didn't really matter, you don't need forgiveness. You just need to clear up a misunderstanding. Forgiveness is when it did happen. And it does matter. And you're going to deal with it and end up loving and accepting one another again anyway. I also want to point out that what Jesus says here, if someone sins against you, go to them one-on-one. If they won't listen to you, bring others. If they still won't listen to you, then you escalate it to the life of the entire community. That is not necessarily a universal template for conflict resolution, okay? So for example, if you have been abused by somebody in any way, you probably should not go to that person one-on-one. It would be unsafe for you, okay? So just want to get that out. This is not a universal template, but I want you to hear the spirit of what he's saying. And I think it's intriguing that even 2,000 years ago, the context in which this passage comes, Jesus has just finished giving a teaching about how you care for the most vulnerable people in your society. That's what came before this. He uses children as the paradigm, where he says, just as these ones are vulnerable in society, God prioritizes these very people and says, let them come to me. I think part of what Jesus is doing here is setting out a vision for those who have no voice, for those who have no power, For those who have been hurt or excluded or marginalized to actually find a voice. He says if you don't have a voice, find somebody in the community who can go with you and amplify your voice and help you to be heard. See, we're in this together. Now, when you choose to go one-on-one, and if that doesn't work, you go with more than one person, on one hand, that protects you. It amplifies your voice. It also protects you from your own blind spots. Because now you're going to say, hey, you two, I want you to come with me. I've got to go talk to Matt about this thing that Matt did and how mad it made me. But then they might also say, well, what was your part in it? Did you have anything to do with it, right? They're going to help you see your own blind spots as well. This is where the community helps one another with this 360-degree vision. And again, the point is not to merely tell that person off and tell them how terrible they are. The point is a relentless pursuit of a restored relationship. And it's a two-way street. See, Matthew 18, it is the companion piece to something Jesus says in Matthew 5, okay? In Matthew 18 it says, if someone has sinned against you, here's how you go and pursue peace with them. In Matthew 5 it says, if you're at the temple and you're about to give your gift and you realize someone has something against you, in other words, you have wronged someone else, leave your gift behind. Go to that person and prioritize making it right with them before you give your gift in the community. In other words, if someone has wronged you, pursue relentless relationship. If you have wronged someone else, pursue relentless relationship. We go about the tough business of community together. Now, how do you do this? We've talked more about forgiveness a few times in the last several weeks. Let me just point out what Jesus gives us right here in this passage. How do you do this? It's severely practical and it's ruthlessly idealistic. Okay? We've already talked about kind of the cadence of that in a second, but here's the overarching piece. Don't do it alone. So if you live long, someone's going to wrong you. And any sort of pain or anger or resentment, it has an isolating property to it. And so we can go off and seethe in the corner on our own. We enter into this downward spiral. And Jesus is already counteracting that, saying, don't do it alone. In our individualistic American society, this sounds surprising. That there's actually a huge resource each of us can tap into right now. It's the community that's around you. You are not the church. The community resource that comes and says, as you are pursuing a relentless relationship, we do this together. Not to go tell them off, to get the relationship back. And so if a person doesn't listen, you don't just go, well, they didn't listen. Tough. I mean, friends, let's be candid. Perhaps you went to them in a less generous way. When I'm hurt, I let the generous person with me, okay? I get that. Perhaps you went to them in a way that was rude or mean or unthoughtful. You know, didn't listen to bad. Tough. Except that's not how we do it. Instead, we go and we get another individual from the church to help us the relationship right, to help us figure out who needs to do what to make amends and move together. We give up on the relationships. See, relationships are not commodities. In our consumeristic society, we have been enculturated to believe that we buy things, we use them, and then we throw them away. We start a friendship until it's no longer beneficial to us, and then we discard them for another one. And Jesus said that's not how we relationship. It's church, community. We go to help us make it right. We don't go up on the relationship. And we still won't. Come to verse 17, and it sounds quite harsh. If the offender refuses to listen to the church community, let such a one be as a Gentile and a tax collector. And in that society, in the religious context, the Jewish context, kind of two classes of people. There were Jews and everybody else. Okay? Gentile, it comes from the Greek word ethnos, from which you get ethnicity. Simply saying, treat them like people in another tribe. They are not with you. They are against you. Or treat them like a tax collector. Tax collectors were traitors to the Jewish people because they were Jewish by ethnicity, but they were working for the government to come and take taxes from Jewish people to give to Caesar, so Caesar could oppress the Jewish people. These were the ultimate bandit traitors of the community. So if you still listen to treat like a Gentile or tax collector, sounds like he's saying, shun them, push them out. Except Jesus turned the whole on its head. He loves tax collectors. In fact,